As those of you that have been here since yesterday know, this is going to be a series of lessons that are built around evidences from the natural world. So I'm going to begin tonight, because we're doing this presentation in a church building, in a way I would not be doing if I were doing this in a science lecture hall on a college campus, which I have done numerous times. I'm going to begin this lecture with a reference to Scripture. And I think it's entirely fitting to do that in this kind of a setting as we begin. But I want you to understand that it is not necessary to deal with this topic with reference to the Scripture. It is important, in my mind, if you're going to talk to folks, as I often have, who are agnostic or atheistic about God, to use the text of the Bible as some kind of an approach to those folks, because if they don't even believe in God, they certainly don't believe this is the Word of God. So I typically don't do that when I'm dealing with folks like that. But in a church setting, I think that's appropriate. Part of the reason is I want all you who are Christians and already believers in God to realize that the Bible itself teaches that what I'm about to do tonight, tomorrow night, and Wednesday night is biblically supported. So that's why I'm doing it. Thank you for being here. Much else could be said by way of introduction. I have too many things to say to get on to that. We're going to get on to our subject at hand. So I'm going to start this. You see the title on the screen? Christianity and Science, Conflict or Coherence. I got that title from this little book called Science and Christianity, Conflict or Coherence by Henry Schaeffer. Now, a couple of rules of thumb. This is a class. The elders have told me I could teach this as a science lecture. So you are in my class, and we're getting ready to study some science tonight. In my class, I have some rules. First of all, I don't allow sleeping. And I can see you. So if you start to nod because you had a big supper and you're getting drowsy, I'm going to do something about that. Secondly, I want involvement. Now, I'm not going to pick on individual people, but I'm going to want lots of involvement from you. Kind of like we did yesterday in our classes, where you nod your head or you sometimes answer as a group. And most of the time I'm going to tell you what the answer is before you say it. But I want you involved because the material we're going to be studying is heavy material. It's not necessarily something that's your favorite thing to talk about or that you will understand it all. I'm not expecting that. Here's what I'm expecting. By the time we get finished tonight and throughout this week, I'm expecting that you will have a deeper and more profound reverence for the God who made us, and will be in absolute awe of his wonder. So, Henry Schaeffer. How many of you in this class have ever heard of Henry Schaeffer? Schaeffer. 0. I'm not surprised. He's not a well-known person. But I will tell you, in the chemistry realm, he's very well-known. And if you read the last few pages of this book, you would find example of his awards that he had won and the papers that he's published and his prowess in the professional chemical community. So I'll read you from his first chapter here, just a few things. He says, Dr. Keith Ward, professor at Oxford, says this: thus, the appeal to the general intelligibility of nature, its structuring in accordance with mathematical principles, which can be understood by the human mind, suggests the existence of a creative mind, a mind of vast wisdom and power. I say amen. And class, you're going to find out what you don't already know in some instances. The nature is very mathematical and orderly, which is precisely what you would expect if there was a creative mind behind it that had a determined purpose. And so he's saying that openly, as do numerous scientists. This text class was written to teach a 2-hour class at the University of Georgia to anybody who chose to take it as an elective. This man taught openly belief in a God creator at the University of Georgia. And the class was taken by many students. And throughout this text, he quotes numerous scientists who are believers in God. I say that to tell you, we are not dealing with something tonight that is not supported strongly by numerous well-produced scientists. And if you don't believe me, get this book. Which makes me remember one other thing I was going to tell you. I'm going to give Jacob, or one of you men back there, a bibliography that can be made available to anybody that wants it. So I'm going to be quoting and using lots of different books. The bibliography has them all in it and a bunch more, and the best ones have stars by them. So I hope you'll get that if you want to go into this more fully. All right, Henry Schaeffer, phenomenal scientist, strong believer in God. Let's go to the book that is the foundation of Christianity. He argues that science and Christianity are not in conflict. There's a lot of folks that think in our time that science and Christianity are in conflict. They are not. They are in concord. The scripture in Psalm 19 in the Old Testament declares that the heavens declare the glory of God and the firmament shows his handiwork. Day unto day utters speech, and night unto night reveals knowledge. There's no speech nor language where their voice is not heard. Their line is gone throughout all the earth, and their words to the end of the world. That's one Old Testament passage among many that declare that the natural world is a testimony to the existence of God. You agree, class? That's clear, isn't it? Yes. The second passage I want to show you is in the New Testament, and it's really our theme passage for this week. Romans chapter 1, verse 20. Let's read it. For since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse. Because although they knew God, they did not glorify him as God, but nor were thankful, but became futile in their thoughts, and their foolish hearts were darkened. Doesn't that passage teach that you can see God who's invisible? How do you see him? You see him through the things that are made. When you look at something that has the clear evidence of design, it leads you to think that thing was designed. And if it was designed by an intelligent being who had the power to do that. That's what the New Testament says. And it also says everybody should be able to see that. And I hope you notice there was nothing said in that passage about having to have the Bible in your hand while you're doing it. No, nature itself is sufficient to teach you that. So, for the rest of our time this evening, and for the rest of this week, we're going to be spending our time talking about what science can tell you. Science is an observance of nature, and it reveals God in itself. And the argument we're going to be making is called the argument from design. Always, in my judgment, the most powerful evidence for God in the natural world. So we're going to be making the argument from design over and over again. That's my introduction tonight in a church building. If I were in a chemistry classroom, that would be left out. And we'd start where I'm about to begin right now. So I'm saying to all of you believers in God in here, please take no offense that for the rest of my time this evening, I'm laying this book aside. No offense. That's God's word. I preached from it yesterday, didn't I, class? I believe it with all my heart as the Word of God. But God has another book. We're going to turn to his other book, the book of the natural world. So welcome to my class. So glad to have you. And we're going to be talking about a number of different things tonight. But here's where we'll start. Modern science developed in the context of Christianity. I'm just letting you let that sink in a minute. In Schaeffer's book, he argues strongly that were it not for Christianity, we would not have modern-day science. And he makes an extensive argument to support that position. I believe he's right. Many of the key scientists in the Age of Enlightenment, that's 1600 to 1800 AD, were strong believers in God, but not only in God, but in Jesus Christ, and that the Bible was the Word of God. And they openly said so. And they are the ones that laid the groundwork for modern-day science. Here's one of them. How many of you in this room have ever heard of Johannes Kepler? Not very many. But Johannes Kepler was an amazing scientist. He was an astronomer and a mathematician. And he is given credit for discovering the planetary laws in our solar system. And he did it using antiquated stuff. And in mathematics class, do you remember doing logarithms? And how you loved it? He had to use logarithms to do his arithmetic. And he had a massive amount of arithmetic to do. So the man deserves credit, if nothing else, for the massive amount of time he did discovering things. But in all of it, here's what he would say. I was merely thinking God's thoughts after him. Since we astronomers are the priests of the highest God in regard to the book of nature, it benefits us to be thoughtful not of the glory of our minds, but rather above all else of the glory of God. Don't you love it? And he was so open about that. Listen, folks, what we're going to be doing the next 3 nights is thinking God's thoughts after him and showing you that there's evidence abundant everywhere that God was behind what we observe. Kepler is to be praised for the fact that he said, it's not my mind should be glorified, it's his mind. How many have heard of this one? Isaac Newton. Well, if you haven't heard of him, you need to wake up. I believe he is the most famous scientist ever in the history of mankind. And I could fill this screen with reasons. So here's a few. He independently invented the calculus. How many in this room have had calculus? A few of you. It's only the most important subject you'll ever take. I taught it for 35 years. In science and math, it's foundational class because calculus is the study of infinity. You'll never get closer to thinking the mind of God than when you're studying infinity. And you can study infinity. You remember? Some of you had me as a teacher. You do remember that, right? He not only knew the calculus, he invented it. He formulated the classical laws of motion. Listen, Newton's laws ruled the world during those days. It wasn't until Einstein came along and added more dimensions to that. It didn't take away Newton's laws, it simply added to it. He invented and applied the universal laws of gravitation. Class, that is world-shaking. And I have to tell you at this point, he discovered how to express it mathematically. I'm not going to take the time to give you that equation tonight, but I will tell you that it depends on the mass of two objects. They have a force of attraction between them. And it depends on the square of the distance between them inversely. You got that? Plus, there's a constant in that equation called the gravitational constant, which he estimated very well in the 16 and 1700s. We now have a much better estimation for that, but he did a great job of establishing, first, that there is gravity, and second, that you could explain it mathematically. And then you could use that mathematical equation to project and predict other things. You do know, don't you, class, that is used all the time by our space program. Did Newton know anything about the space program? No, he did not. But his laws are still being used. He built the first practical reflecting telescope. He pioneered the studies of light and optics, which was another whole revolutionary thing in science, and led to the computer age, folks. And he theoretically determined the speed of sound, and on and on and on and on. Certainly one of the greatest scientists that ever lived. And here's what he said about our solar system. Though these bodies may indeed continue in their orbits by the mere laws of gravity, yet they could by no means have at first derived the regular position of the orbits themselves from these laws. Thus, this most beautiful system of sun, planets, and comets could only proceed from the counsel and dominion of an intelligent and powerful being. He said in the general scholium of his most important work, the Principia. Here's the most famous scientist that ever lived, saying this had to be God. I love it. But folks, you can study this without opening this book. These statements come from their study of nature. And if you were in England in the early 1800s, and you were in a college setting, kids, you would take this class, because it was a required class in those days. This particular class by William Paley called Natural Theology, can you read the subtitle here? Let's take a look at it. Or evidences of the existence and attributes of the deity collected from the appearances of nature. The whole class was to show you that nature points to a deity. They called it natural theology, the biblical evidence of nature. And William Paley's book, published in 1802, was one of the most famous treatises in the history of this topic. Charles Darwin took this class. In fact, he was so impacted by this class that he decided to become a preacher. Did you know that? He literally did change to study theology. And he was going to be a preacher. He was also a naturalist, and he loved the sciences. So he was asked to go on this ship that sailed around the world, you remember? And during that trip is when he started questioning whether living things, species, had to have God to come into existence. And he began to develop his theory of evolution of living things, which we'll talk about a little more. But I want to tell you, earlier in his life as a college student, he was deeply impacted by the famous Watchmaker argument, for example. You remember that one? I'll just tell you a little bit, and I'm going to use a little British, okay? Welcome to my class, students. Students, if you were on the heath and you walked along and you kicked over a stone and there you found a watch lying on the ground, and you picked up the watch and examined its features, it is highly unlikely that you would say, isn't it interesting what nature did? It is much more likely you would say, who did that? And may I say to you, class, that when we look at nature, there are thousands of things far more complicated than a watch that show all the evidence and far more of design. And if you're going to say that about the watch, you best say that about nature. Welcome to Natural Theology, class. I've moved forward to 1980, the Cosmos series by Carl Sagan. Carl Sagan was a professor at Harvard University when I was a student in 1967-68. I did not have him as a teacher, but he was an influential professor in those days. And his Cosmos series that came out later in the 80s was the most popular science series that's ever been on television. And the first statement made in that series, if you've ever listened to it, was the cosmos is all that is, or all that ever was, or all that ever will be. So the introduction to this great science series was a statement of philosophy. That's not science. Science can no more prove that. That's a statement of what Carl Sagan believes with all his heart. It's not a scientific statement, but it does represent many of the consensus agents who had power and authority in the sciences in the 20th century. And I will tell you, as I was in college going through these courses and trying to get established in my own thinking, the most of the force upon us students was to cease believing in a God because we don't need him. So how is it, class, that from the 19th century and earlier, when most of the scientists were proclaiming the wonders of God and nature, now here we are in the 20th century, and most of science is telling you that you don't need God? How'd you get there? And I want to show you it's even worse. By the end of the 20th century, Richard Dawkins, British evolutionary biologist and author, professor of the public understanding of science at Oxford, a prestigious university in England. Professor Dawkins was granted the title by that university as the professor of public understanding of science. And that's the reason I quote him a lot, because he's put forth as the representative who's going to tell us peons, non-science people, what we should know about the sciences. And I can tell you he's one of the most biased people I know. And sometimes he's downright mean. And if he were here, I'd say you need to be more careful how you speak. And may I say to you, I always want to be respectful of people, forceful, but respectful. And if you find me not doing that, I hope you'll correct me. But I want you to listen to some things he said. In his book, The Selfish Gene, 1976. See, he came to believe and still believes that DNA is there to survive itself. And that's all it cares about. It's selfish. And here's one of his statements. Faith is blind trust, the absence of evidence, even in the teeth of evidence, a process of non-thinking. I have discovered in my discussions with folks like Richard Dawkins that one of the things they hate the most is to bring in the subject of faith. They said, we don't have faith, that's what you religious people have. Faith belongs in religion class, not science. We deal with facts and evidence and the methods of science, not faith. And he describes faith as a process of non-thinking. Now, there's a lot of believers in this room, I suspect. Would you say, class, that biblical faith is non-thinking? Absolutely not. Would you say he expects us to believe without any evidence? The exact opposite. He believes your faith should be founded upon solid evidence. And that's the way it's presented. So his representation of faith is completely wrong. And believe me, class, there's lots of faith in science. Because science can only go so far. And beyond that, you have to believe that the evidence supports it. That's faith. But it gets worse. In his book, The God Delusion, in 2006, he said, if this book is as I intend, if this book works as I intend, religious readers who open it will be atheists when they put it down. Is he trying to convert you? Yes, he is. He is part of the new atheist class. During the 2000s and on up, there was a whole group of men called the Four Horsemen of the Atheists, of the new atheism. Dawkins is one of the leading agents of that. Well, here's what he says. Listen to this. God is a delusion, a psychotic delinquent invented by mad, deluded people. Thank you. Anybody in this room believe in God? You're mad and deluded. That's not very nice. And besides that, it's not true at all. So here is the professor of the public understanding of science calling believers in God a bunch of deluded, stupid people. Shame on him. That is not helpful to a common discussion of rational people. How did we get there? Isaac Newton would turn over in his grave at such talk. I'm going to do the fastest historical treatment I can do because I have other things I want to talk to you about. But this whole change in approach happened in 100 years. And it continues today. So Pierre Simon de Laplace, 1749 to 1827, thought of himself as the next Isaac Newton, and he was far from it. But he disagreed with Newton when he said nature with its matter, energy, and forces could produce and maintain our solar system. There is no need for a God hypothesis. So said Pierre Simon de Laplace. So in other words, the solar system and its surrounding universe could have come about without God. Charles Lyell wrote one of the most famous geology texts in the 1800s. And notice the title, An Attempt to Explain the Former Changes in the Earth's Surface by Reference to Causes Now in Operation. The key to Charles Lyell's position was the present is the key to the past. You can explain all geological formations by using forces already present, and over millions of years, they would develop what's there. You don't need God in geology. Charles Darwin, 1859, in his most famous text on the origin of species, and did you notice the subtitle? By means of natural selection, or the preservation of favored races in the struggle for life. Did you know that was the subheading? Because Darwinists believe that favored races are preserved and others are eliminated. Is it any wonder that was a favorite text of Hitler and communists everywhere who want to wipe out millions? Because if you take this view and you believe your race is more important, then what's the problem with destroying millions of people from other races? No problem. You see, Darwin came to believe there's no need for a designer to account for the origin of species of life. Natural selection acting on natural variation accounts for the appearance of design. Listen to that, class. The appearance of design. But they spend the rest of their time trying to convince you, even though it sure looks like everything's designed, it's not. So you don't need God for that either. And believe me, that's what I was hearing in my college days, over and over again. That's why I'm doing this, class, because I want these young people here and the rest of you to hear this over and over again, because you hear the other all the time. Perrin and Haldane came up with a theory that you don't need God to produce life from non-life either. Their theory was the early Earth had a different atmosphere, conditions were different, and under those conditions, non-living things could produce living things. Can't happen anymore because there's too many different circumstances, too much oxygen around in the atmosphere. But the conditions were different then, and so therefore you didn't need God for that either. Much more to that story, but I'm telling you that's another facet where God was removed from the necessity. So how did we get here? Because one after another, the citadels of science were portraying that God is not necessary. And by the way, many would say, you folks who believe in God just believe in the God of the gaps. You put God in where you don't know how it's going, what's happening there and how it's happening. And the more science discovers, the more you move God out because you've learned how that happened. I hope you don't believe in a God of the gaps. That's not a good argument, class. We believe in a God who's left his evidence everywhere for creating things, not in the gaps where we don't understand yet. So there we are. That's a quick history. I say it's time, class, to revisit the argument from design in this century. And I'm happy to tell you there has been new evidence found by the sciences in the 20th and 21st century that overwhelmingly supports the argument from design. That's what I'm going to tell you about. So here's the book I'm going to use to get started. Stephen C. Meyer. If you haven't read after this man and you're interested in this topic, you need to get his 3 books. He's written a trilogy. The first one was The Signature in the Cell. We're going to use that tomorrow night and Wednesday night, some of it. Second was Darwin's Doubt. That was a book about the origin of life itself. Darwin's biggest doubt was the fossil record, because it does not support the theory of evolution at all. And Darwin's Doubt is what he focuses in on that book, and it's powerful, talking about the origin of life. And then the third one is this one, The Return of the God Hypothesis, just published in 2021. And it's this one I'm going to appeal to tonight as we look at things that have been discovered in the last 2 centuries, century and a half, that have shown the evidence for God. So here we go. The evidence has become overwhelmingly strong. May I say it again? From the sciences, not the Bible. From the sciences. That first, the universe, space, matter, and time had a beginning. Did you know, class, that atheists in the 1800s thought the universe was eternal? That matter is eternal. Time's eternal. And then you don't have to explain where it came from. And so you ask them, where'd that come from? And they say, well, it was eternal. And of course, you know what they'd ask you. If you say God did it, what are they going to ask you? Where'd God come from? And you're going to say, he's eternal. Well, the fact is, one or the other has to be, something has to be eternal, doesn't it? Is it more sensible that mind produced matter? That mind is eternal and matter is not? Or that matter is eternal and it produced mind? What's more reasonable? Well, I think I know the answer to that question. But what I'm telling you, class, is the evidence now overwhelmingly from science is there was a beginning to matter, space, and time. I'm not talking about that one because it's got too much math. And I don't have time to deal with it. Some of it I don't even understand, I will just frankly admit. But the evidence, and I could list you about 6 things that say there was a beginning. And if that is the case, class, that is powerful evidence that somebody began it. We're not discussing it, but it's in the books. If you want to study that in detail, please do. And when you get finished studying it and you understand it all, will you please call me? And I need help on some of it. The second one is this. The universe, our solar system, and Earth are remarkably fine-tuned to support life on Earth and have been since the beginning. Now, folks, in my mind, that is one of the most powerful arguments for a creationist that exists. And I want to try to get that across to you tonight. The fine-tuning argument is his second piece of evidence. And thirdly, even the simplest forms of life at the biochemical level contain massive amounts of digital information being used to produce and maintain an untold number of molecular machines and complex processes. A lot of words there, class. Here's a summary. Everywhere you look, from the most massive things to the most minute things, are full of information and machines that do incredible things. And as far as anything man has ever known, information comes from intelligence, not by itself. Those two are my topics for tomorrow night and Wednesday night. Well, fine-tuning is going to start tonight. But the biochemical piece, and you'd think I don't love that? That's chemistry, folks. We're going to talk about those Tuesday and Wednesday night. Please don't miss this. So let's start this way on the fine-tuning. I want to read you first from a book by Paul Davies. Paul Davies is an evolutionist through and through. He does not believe in creation. But he's honest enough to say some very factual things in this book. And I appreciate that. And he doesn't call you deluded people like some people do. So I'm turning now to page 2, and you notice the name, the Goldilocks Enigma. Now, kids, can you all help me? Goldilocks? What do you know about her? Where'd she go? Into the woods and went into what? Hurry up, I don't have time. Come on, let's go. Where did she go? Huh? In a house, the Three Bears house. Y'all are with us, aren't you? All right, and when she got in the house, what'd she see? Porridge. You know what porridge is? Okay, some kind of soup, right? So there were bowls on the table, and she went and sat down in front of one bowl and tried it out, and it was, everybody say it with us, it was too hot. So she went around to another bowl, and it was too cold, and then she went to the third bowl, and it was, now that was weak, class. The third bowl was, exactly, and that's why he called it Goldilocks. And enigma means puzzle. In other words, he didn't know what the answer is. Now, the fact is he in the back goes ahead and gives you an answer, but he doesn't know that. He's giving his best guess. All right, so this is the Goldilocks Enigma book. And he says on page 2, one of the most significant facts, I think I have a quote on it, yeah, it's up there. One of the most significant facts, arguably the most significant fact about the universe, is that we're a part of it. Would you agree? How did we get here is the question. We are the most complex, incredible, living things on the face of the earth. It's remarkable. And then upon page 191, he says this toward the end of the book. Everyone agrees the universe looks as if it was designed. And then he spends 200 pages trying to convince you it was not. It's amazing. Why not just say, yeah, it was designed. Let's talk about what the designer is and who he is and his features and what he does. No. We're not having that. Here's another quote from Paul Davies from an article called The Anthropic Principle. The really amazing thing is not that life on earth is balanced on a knife edge, because it is, class. But that the entire universe is balanced on a knife edge and would be total chaos if any of the natural constants were off even slightly. Now, I know I lost you. Here's what he said. When you look at the universe, there are a host of constants that exist that we've learned about, like Newton's gravitational constant. All right? There are lots of those. And every one of them we have discovered is fine-tuned. In other words, what was the final answer I asked you about Goldilocks? It is, come on, class, it is, they have to be just right. And we know how just right they have to be because we've measured it. And physics can predict if it's off just a little bit, you won't be here. That's the truth. When I was in school in the 1960s, scientists had discovered 12 characteristics of the cosmos and our solar system that were fine-tuned to make human life possible. They knew about 12 in the 1960s. So it was just beginning to open up this topic. And 12 wasn't enough to convince folks that something's going on here. But here's the latest, class. By 2020, there were at least 50 books written and published documenting the anthropic principle. And from these books, Hugh Ross and his staff of scientists at Reasons to Believe cataloged over 800 fine-tuned characteristics that are essential for any potential human life site in the observable universe. Not 12, class, but 800. Now, some argue that some of those are repeats, so let's just give it a couple of hundred. How about 600? So, you're my jury, ladies and gentlemen, and I'm trying to convince you that the evidence of the natural world is somebody did this. This did not happen by natural causes. How many things would it take to convince you, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, how many coincidences are there that you would find acceptable and said, isn't it interesting how that just happened? Well, I'm telling you, there's over 600 different ones. And may I tell you how finely tuned they are? To do that, I want to get another book out here. I think if you're going to get any book, especially you folks with kids, this is where you need to start, kids. It's called God's Crime Scene by J. Warner Wallace. I think I have it up here. There it is. God's Crime Scene. So let me give you just a little background. J. Warner Wallace is a cold case detective. Y'all know what that is? No? Well, thanks for asking. It's a detective that takes a case that's been sitting in the shelf for a long time. It's gotten cold. Would you think it's harder to solve that case than it is a live case? I would think so. But that's how good he is. He's a cold case detective. He was raised by a daddy who did the same thing. And his daddy was an atheist. So he grew up an atheist. He is now a believer because he's applied his methods of being a detective to believing in God in the universe because of the evidence. And every chapter in this book is built around a case that he solved. And it applies it to where the universe comes from. It's a wonderful book. Every one of you should read this. And it's well done. It's written for the average person. So we're going to have a little nighttime reading here. I'm turning to chapter 2, class. The title of this chapter is Tampering with the Evidence. Tampering with the evidence. You with me? Helen knew something was wrong when her daughter Carrie failed to answer the door. It was a bright summer afternoon. Carrie said she'd be home, and her car was indeed parked in the driveway. Helen tried to peek in through the living room window, but the curtains were drawn unusually. Carrie never locked the back door, but when Helen walked around to the backyard of the old house, she found the back door locked and all the windows closed. This was not at all like Carrie. She usually left one badly worn rear window slightly ajar. Helen began to panic. She knew Todd and Carrie had a tumultuous marriage, one that included physical violence. Todd had moved out, but Helen still feared for her daughter's safety. You see, the couple had a child named Lexi, but violence had only intensified since her birth. A week ago, Todd had threatened to kill Carrie. And just last night, Carrie confided in her mama there had been another fight. When Helen couldn't get Carrie to answer the door on this afternoon, she decided to call the police. And that's when J. Warner Wallace got involved. I don't have time to tell you the whole story. They started discovering, and here's what they do, class. They look for foundational information. That's background stuff. Well, in this case, the fact that he hated his wife, wasn't that background information? And doesn't that color the evidence? Absolutely. And there were other background things, but then there's regional things, like what about all around that house? Stuff that you found. And then there's local things, like what's inside that house and what's going on. And here's the approach he took. If you can explain By the way, I forgot to tell you, there were 2 dead bodies in the house. When they finally got into the house, they found Lexi and her mama dead on the bed upstairs. So the question was that a natural death? Or did somebody tamper with this? Can you explain this death without leaving the inside of the house? That's the approach. Or does the evidence point that somebody tampered with this? So let me explain to you just a few things. Once they got inside, first the smell was horrendous because there was gas everywhere. And they had to get the, what did they call them, the hazmat team before they could even go in. They found that the pocket door at the bottom of the stairwell was closed. It was never closed. It was this time. Upstairs, they found the door to the master bedroom closed with a pile of laundry against the bottom of the door. Carrie would never allow that. Inside the bedroom, he discovered the source of the gas. Many years prior, the old house had been retrofitted with a gas heater that was mounted to the wall separating the bedroom from the upstairs hallway. The pilot light was out, but the gas valve was wide open. There's lots of else in here. Circumstantial evidence. Nobody saw the murder, class. And in a follow-up investigation, we discovered the gas company had turned off the gas service for lack of payment. And 2 days prior to the time of death, Todd had paid to start the service again. They declared it a homicide. And the investigation began full scope. We were compelled to examine the evidence of tampering because one important fact, there were 2 dead bodies at the crime scene. In a similar way, when we look at the nature of our universe, the existence of our living bodies ought to provoke an investigation. And what we should look for is the foundational, regional, and locational conditions that demand explanation. Can these be explained from inside the universe, or is it tampered with? That's the question. Now, I will tell you, without going through all the details, the jury convicted Todd of first-degree murder of his wife and daughter, all on circumstantial evidence, because the evidence was overwhelming. Class, when it comes to belief in God, nobody has seen him and never will. Can he be convicted as being in existence on circumstantial evidence? Yes, he can. Just like in a crime case, if you have sufficient evidence that it's overwhelming, and it is. So don't you love it? That's his approach. And every chapter is another dimension of exploring all of that. So, what I've got to do here in the next few minutes is explore with you just a little bit. So here it is. The laws of nature, the physical constants and ratios, the properties of elements and the properties of chemicals, all of those things, class, have constants, variables that are found in them that all have to be, say it. I already told you what the answer is. They have to be just right. Let me tell you how just right. I've got a little statistic here. You know that gravitational constant in Newton's law of gravity, the G? It cannot vary in less than 1 part in 10 to the 34th power. You know what 10 to the 34th power is? It's 10 with 34 zeros after it. So there's 1 chance out of 10 with 34 zeros that you can change that much. And if you change it more than that, you wouldn't be here. And everybody knows it. If this were a court case, class, my defense guy who's trying to defend these guys would say, no, what Dr. Payne is saying is correct. So if you had a machine, let's just picture this. Here's a machine, and it's got a bunch of dials on it. Every one of those dials represents one of these constants, properties. The gravitational constant dial has to be correct if you changed it as much as 1 over 10 to the 34th. You wouldn't have a universe. Now you say, I don't believe that. Well, you don't have to believe me. But I'm telling you, that's what the scientists have discovered. You cannot change that gravitational constant, or we wouldn't be here. Now, there are hundreds of those just like that I don't have time to tell you about. But in his book, he lists several of them, and I thought I'd just read 2 or 3 of them just for your information. The strong nuclear force, the weak nuclear force, the electromagnetic force have to be within very narrow ranges. The ratio of electrons to protons, if they deviated by more than 1 to 10 to the 37th, you wouldn't be here. The electromagnetic force and gravity were altered. I've already said that. You can't do it. So how many would it take, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, on that dial, if there are 600 dials and every one of them have to be, say it, if you changed any one of them, you wouldn't be here. They all have to be just right, and they're all different. Would that convince you somebody made that? Well, if not, what can I do? I mean, how many coincidences can it be that nature just did this somehow? It's not possible, class. The fine-tuning is overwhelming. And we keep learning more all the time. So let's talk about regional now. Those are foundational because they're properties of the whole universe. How about regional? You have to be in the proper type of galaxy. Did you know that? Not just any galaxy will do. We've learned that over the centuries. So here's the latest telescope. James Webb, you're familiar with this, aren't you? Went up into outer space in 2022, and it sent back its first collective picture in July of that year. So I'm happy to present to you the first picture of the James Webb telescope of a portion of nature. But everybody's eyes on me. Don't you miss this. There's a lead-in article put out by NASA that says if you take 1 grain of sand and hold it out at arm's length and close one eye and think of there's your grain of sand, and the amount of sky that's blocked out by that grain of sand is what's in this picture I'm about to show you. Are you with me? Did you get the force of that? Is that a little teensy piece of the universe? What you're about to look at in this picture I'm going to show you is discovered by the James Webb telescope in that one tiny piece of the universe, which we'd never seen before because we couldn't see that far. Okay, is everybody with me? My Marilyn tells me, sweetie, you lost me in the first 30 seconds. Would you please explain it clearly? So don't shake your head yes if you don't understand it. Do you get what I'm saying and what you're about to look at? Okay, in that case, we're going to turn off all the lights. Every light. How about the doors back there? That's unacceptable. It's too much light. You know you live in light pollution all the time. You should live out west somewhere where there isn't any light so you can actually observe what's in the sky by natural vision. It's incredible, and we all miss it here in the city. So I think you need to have it all dark here right now. That'll help a lot. Thank you so much. Not enough because there's still windows. All right, but everybody's eyes up here. You remember what you're seeing. So what do you think? Is that incredible? Here's what I want to tell you, class. You see these globs right here? You say, look at those stars. Look at an amazing number of stars. Class, that's not a star. That's a galaxy, which probably has 100 billion stars in it. That's a galaxy. That's a galaxy. That's a galaxy. That's one. That's one. Look at this one right here. Can you tell that's a spiral? That's a spiral galaxy, class. Probably has 200 billion stars in it. We've never seen this before until, I have a slide here, July 12, 2022. So are there lots of galaxies, class? Massive amount, more than we ever dreamed. Massive amounts of galaxies. And some of them are spiral, some of them are elliptical like these, some of them are irregular like some of these others. They just don't have a good form. But look at most of those are galaxies. It's utterly amazing. All right, I need the lights back on now so I can see what I'm doing. Here's what you need to know, class. There are three basic types of galaxies: elliptical, irregular, and spiral. And everybody knows that to have a solar system like ours, with a planet that has sensitive life on it, has to be in a spiral galaxy. Because the other galaxies' properties are such that they would destroy things before they could exist, and they certainly couldn't exist hardly any length of time. Now, don't believe me about that. I'm just telling you it's the case. And if this were a court case, I would not mind my defense attorney arguing about that. Let's just get the books out and let the scientists tell us. It has to be a spiral galaxy. Guess what kind of galaxy we live in, class? A spiral galaxy. Isn't that an interesting coincidence? That our regional galaxy happens to be the right kind of galaxy. Well, that could be an accident, couldn't it? Possible. That's not enough, though. You have to know where it is in the galaxy. It's not good enough just to be in a spiral galaxy. So here's a galaxy looked at sideways. See that big glob in the middle? Every spiral galaxy has a big glob in the middle with a bunch of stars and a whole bunch of stuff going on. If your solar system were sitting in there, it wouldn't last any time. Too many forces acting on it. There are two places in the spiral galaxy where you can have a solar system like ours, here and here. It's about 1/150th of the total volume of that whole thing, which eliminates 149 150ths. Doesn't it? So class, I'm telling you, the just fine-tuning has eliminated most of the galaxies in the universe and most of the parts of the spirals. Because we have learned it has to be, you are weak. I expect enthusiasm. Am I being enthusiastic? The reason you've eliminated those, because we know very well they can only be in certain factors. They have to be. It's right, or you won't be here. Okay, you got it. But it's not enough just to have the right location in the galaxy. You have to have the right kind of a star. You think just any old star will do? No, it will not. Our sun is one of the most significant parts of this whole picture. Do I have time to talk about all that? No, I don't. But I want to talk about a few things. So there's our sun compared to the planets. It's a pretty good size object. But compared to other stars, not so much. Let's look. There's our sun, and there's Sirius, there's Pollux, that's Arcturus. But it gets worse. How about here? This is Betelgeuse and Antares. And where's the sun? Right there. I can't see it, can you? It's 1 pixel compared to Antares. The sun is well, let me tell you, there's a whole lot of stars smaller than the sun. They're called dwarf stars. There's lots of them. And guess what? The sun is exactly right. It's almost right in the middle. But that's just one feature. The sun's temperature, what it radiates, critically important, and how much it radiates, at what speed it radiates. How many storms does it have? You know about storms on the sun, right? You better not have too many. There are 100 features of the sun that have to be, and we don't have time to talk about all that. But isn't that a fascinating coincidence that our sun happens to be just right? Thank you. But that's not good enough, class. You got to have the right location of the planet. Did you know that? It doesn't matter if you've got a planet, if it's not in the right place. It's called the habitable zone around a sun. And so here are our planets. There's a whole lot of things about the planets that have to be just right. So do you think Jupiter has any life, class? If you do, you need your head examined. It's way too massive. It's not going to have life forms on it. Nobody thinks it does. And all those other large ones, Saturn and Uranus and Neptune, no way. So we know there's life on this one, right? Right here. What's the next one closest to Earth, class? No, it is not. It's Venus. This is Mars. And that one is what? Huh? Mercury. Thank you. And that one is, yes, and Pluto's still a planet. Don't argue with me. It's a tiny planet. And one reason they're arguing about it is because it's so tiny, its moon is almost half as big as it is. But let's not argue about that. The fact is, the only planet that we know anything has life on it is the Earth out of all those, isn't it? Are we looking for life on Venus, class? No, we're not. You know why? It's a dumb planet. Pardon me. Venus rotates backwards. It doesn't rotate at a good rate. It has mostly sulfuric acid in its atmosphere. Not very good. Certainly not to support living things. So Venus is out the window. It's not being looked for life. It doesn't have 1,000 features that it ought to have. It's going to have life on it. So where are we looking for life? Mars. And what are we looking for, class, as evidence that there might have been life there sometime? Water. Because everybody knows you can't have life without water. When people talk about other forms of life, forget it. The only kind of life anybody knows anything about is carbon-based, water-based life. And folks, the evidence that there's any life forms on Mars is slim and none. Okay? The Earth is full of it everywhere you look. So it's got to be the right planet at the right distance. Earth happens to be in the perfect habitable zone of our sun. Isn't that an interesting coincidence? And I've had a scientist tell me, well, if all those factors weren't so, we wouldn't be here. So of course it had to be. No, it didn't have to be. There might not be any life at all. And all these factors say somebody tampered with this. This didn't happen by natural causes. How many coincidences will it take, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, to convince you that's too many for me? Well, I'm up to over 300 or 400. Let's add to it locational fine-tuning. That's all the properties of the Earth itself. Its mass, its spin, its tilt, its moon, its atmosphere, its crust, etc., 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 etc. The properties of its biochemicals and the cells, the genetic code, and molecular machines. That's tomorrow night and the next night. And there are hundreds of those. If you would invite me back, we could spend a whole week on the moon, not on it, but talking about it. Okay? Okay? Listen, the moon is critically important. How many moons do we have? One. You know how many Pluto has? The tiniest planet? Anybody know? Okay, that's your homework assignment. You kids, I want you to come back tomorrow and tell me how many moons Pluto has and name them. And no fair looking at your phones right now. Isn't that drives you crazy. We have one moon that is a beautiful size, that is perfect to do all the things it does for us that allow life to be on this earth. And believe me, if we didn't have that, you wouldn't be here. And it's not just because you can't say sweet things to your sweetheart under the moon. It's because all of its properties. Look, am I leaving it out about 6 months worth? Yeah. But every bit of it is fine-tuned, which means, class, it has to be still weak, but I'll accept it. So tomorrow and Wednesday, we're going to study cellular life at the biochemical level. I love it. And there's more design there than in all the rest of it put together. It's amazing. So where did this fine-tuning of the universe come from? I want to give you quotes from two of the most famous modern scientists. How about Stephen Hawking? You've heard of him? From A Brief History of Time. He is honest enough to say, even though he's an evolutionist to the core, the laws of science as we know them at present contain many fundamental numbers. Have I said that to you? Yes. Like the size of the electric charge of the electron and the gravitational constant. I didn't mention the electron size or its charge, but that's another one. And then he says, the remarkable fact is that the values of these numbers seem to have been very finely adjusted to make possible the development of life. Thank you. That is absolutely right. And my question is, who adjusted it? Isn't it wonderful what Mother Nature did? And people make up ridiculous things to overcome the fine-tuning argument, because you can't overcome it, class. Ladies and the gentlemen of the jury, you would convict anybody that had this much circumstantial evidence against them. You'd convict them. And I love Fred Hoyle. He's feisty. In his book, The Universe, Past and Present Reflections, he says, a common sense interpretation of the facts suggests that a super intellect has monkeyed with physics, as well as chemistry and biology, and that there are no blind forces worth speaking about in nature. You know what Dawkins says? He has a book called The Blind Watchmaker that he claims accounts for all life forms without God. Hoyle says there is no such thing as a blind force. The numbers one calculates from the facts seem to me so overwhelming as to put this conclusion almost beyond question. Would you get rid of that word almost? It's not almost. The case is over. So is it reasonable to believe in God in this scientific age? I'll tell you, class, it's more reasonable than it's ever been in the history of mankind, partly because of the amazing new discoveries we've made in the last 100 years. And if scientists want to put their blinders on and refuse to see that, they will answer for it one day to the one who made them. Because it's as if he's opened up the floodgates. And I can almost see him sitting on that judgment seat and saying, now what are you going to do with this? But some folks are mule-headed, and they will not see it. That's my lesson tonight. Don't miss tomorrow night.